Sakura Wars is an RPG that's highly unique, and its premise alone is what helps it become something more than the norm, which doesn't see you having to explore dungeons or a huge world, but instead take on the role of a young man and lead him through his relationship with a group of female mech pilots as you work towards saving a 1920s version of New York from an invading army of demons led by the infamous Oda Nobunaga. The bonds between the characters are at the center of the game, and the conversations between yourself and the pilots are what really shape the story, with your decisions leading to different outcomes, and getting to know the characters is half of the fun. Where the game really comes into its own though is during the battles, that sees you getting to jump into the mechs and take on each fight. You take to both the ground and the skies, where you get to move each of them around the map and perform different attacks that cost a certain amount of AP. The most important and powerful ability you have though is the way you combine attacks, and in a way for it to tie back into the dating aspects of the game. Depending on how strong your links are with the pilots will determine how powerful the attacks are. The best moments in the game are by far the boss fights, which can be incredibly intense and challenging, but if you put the time into the team they cover each other's backs, which takes away a lot of the pressure and also grants you more amounts of AP to use for your attacks. It's the way how both of these aspects of the game perfectly play into each other that makes Sakura Wars so rewarding, and with multiple endings and scenes, there's plenty of reasons to jump back into it once you've made your way through it. Metal Saga is part of the long-running Metal Max series, and once again takes place in a post-apocalyptic world after AI went rogue and destroyed society. As the player, you step into the role of a hunter who's driven by dreams of glory amongst the many pockets of civilization that remain who've turned to scavenging machinery and building weapons to prove their dominance. The main type being tanks, which play a major role in the game, with you being able to build several types and use them in battle. This is where the huge amount of customization comes into play, which allows you to build over 15 types of tanks with a range of different weapons and armor that have a real effect during each fight. Speaking of the combat, it all revolves around a turn-based system, which of course sees you taking advantage of your tank's various abilities that range from machine guns to shells and special attacks such as napalm and warheads that offer several ways to approach each group of enemies. You won't always be in your tank though, and there's several times you'll find yourself setting out on foot, and here you've got a completely different set of attacks and ways to fight back that ends up mixing up the combat in a really noticeable way. I'd say the best thing about Metal Saga though is how it approaches progression, and it's anything but linear, with just nigh on endless amounts of events that take place throughout the story, and you're free to tackle them as you wish, with a huge world to explore full of several towns and hubs that add to the overall vibe of the world and really help build the story that's told. There are a few issues with the game though, and it mainly comes down to the translation that can be a bit wonky at times, but on the whole it still manages to shine regardless of the few issues with it. With its multiple endings, nearly endless amounts of customization and branching story, Metal Saga ends up being one of the best yet lesser known RPGs you'll find on the PS2. Shining Force Neo broke away from the usual tactical RPG setup that the series was known for, and like many of the games in the franchise, you take on the adventure as Max, a young warrior fresh from training who dreams of bigger and better things by following in the footsteps of his father and joining an elite order. But after he's murdered, it calls him to seek vengeance and hunt down the mysterious masked man responsible. At the heart of the experience, like any other RPG, is the combat, but unlike the other games in the series, it's an action RPG this time around, and you get to control Max directly, with your party members who eventually join being handled by the game itself, and naturally they all have their own unique roles to play during each fight. What adds a lot to the combat are the several options when it comes to battle, and you've got 4 different styles that revolve around various weapons. They all essentially act as different classes, with the one-handed sword offering a balance between damage and defense, the two-handed sword providing the most amount of damage, whereas the staff opens up a wealth of magic spells, and finally the bow that allows you to keep a distance. On top of this, you've got access to combos and special arts that round out your options when it comes to dealing with enemies, and with so many of them on screen at one time, it can become quite hectic, but it's easily where the game is at its best. Of course, you've got a big selection of equipment to utilize as well that gives you a range of different benefits during battle that help level the playing field. And with the game being split into just over 20 different dungeons, there's plenty to work through that gradually escalates the difficulty as you progress. You naturally grow as the challenge increases and your abilities improve, so it never feels unforgiving, and overall it's a great addition to the otherwise strictly tactical RPG series that proved that it could excel as a real-time hack and slasher as well. The PS2 had its fair share of RPGs, but one that doesn't get talked about as much is easily Neopets, that due to its rather cartoonish appearance no doubt gave the impression it was nothing more than a kids game. But there's a surprising amount of depth to the gameplay that makes it a great little RPG to run through. Based on the popular browser game, it all takes place in a world of Neopia, and throws you into the role of Tor, a young farm boy who's training to become a knight. And later on in the game you also get the chance to control Roberta, a sorceress, with both of their paths eventually crossing as they join together to battle a growing threat throughout the kingdom. Now it shares a lot in common with the likes of Zelda and sees you having a huge overworld to explore, with Tor having access to a sword which most of the combat revolves around. You've got your basic swings that can be built into combos, as well as special spins and stabs that provide a lot more damage. Roberta on the other hand excels in the use of magic and is able to shoot projectiles and spells that affect a wide area. You get to switch between them on the fly, and the differences in their approaches really help the combat feel strategic and fresh. On top of this is the concept of motes, which are essentially items that can be slotted into weapons, shields or armor that add an elemental flair to your weapon or equipment that can be upgraded and grant you a bonus when it comes to the amount of damage you deal, or defensive buffs that help keep you in the fight. Where the game is at its best though is with the bosses that are scattered throughout the world, which really test your skill, and the good thing is that the game rewards you for exploring, with plenty of collectibles and hidden quests that help flesh out the experience. Ultimately, if you're looking for a light-hearted RPG to jump into, then Neopets will be right up your street. Even until this day, the PS2 is one of the best platforms for when it comes to niche RPGs, and Atelier Iris is a great example of the genre. The game revolves around an alchemy system which plays a central role throughout the journey, and you take up the fight as Klein, and enter the world of Red Lizine that's filled to the brim with creatures that are out to stop you and your party dead in your tracks as you journey across the land. This is where your alchemy skills come into play, and thanks to the use of your special cane, it's possible to absorb mana spirits that are made up of different elements, and by combining them together it's possible to use them to perform spells, which is where the turn-based combat comes into play. You get to use up to 3 characters at any given time, with them being able to be switched out during a fight with the others in the party, and you get a wealth of options in how to tackle your enemies apart from Klein's ability to summon magic. As you would imagine, leveling up is a huge aspect of the game, but what ends up being more important is how you use your characters and craft weapons that have a greater effect on each of the party members. This is mainly done through the use of crystals and stones that are gained throughout the game, which provide a range of different attributes such as a boost to their attacks or defense, and by fusing the crystals together you can end up with 3 different effects, which can then be attached to a weapon to further your proficiency in each fight. One of my favourite aspects of the game though is the presentation, and the cel-shaded approach affords the game a really cozy vibe, with its bright and colourful locations, characters and battle animations that help it stand out amongst many of the similar types of RPGs that you'll find on the PS2. So if you've never played the series before, Iris Eternal is a great jumping on point. Le Pucelle Tactics is one of the most overlooked SRPGs on the PS2 that comes from the same minds behind Disgaea, and revolves around an elite squad of demon hunters tasked with purifying monsters and maintaining the balance between light and dark. The story, although quite light at the beginning, soon spirals into a sea of conspiracies and betrayals that make it a real highlight of the experience. On the surface, it's easy to assume that the game's a pretty standard SRPG, with all of the battles taking place on a grid where you've got to move your characters around the field and issue commands until the battle's won. But it's the little touches that really sees Le Pucelle become something far more than your simple run-of-the-mill tactical affair. By far the biggest and most impressive aspect of the game is the ability to recruit pretty much any creature into your ranks, and although it may sound like it could have the potential to become overwhelming, it's presented so well that it works extremely intuitively. On the battlefield, you've first got to purify an enemy in order to convince it to join you, and once they're part of your team, you're then responsible for having to nurture it and help it grow. Besides just having to level them up, you get the opportunity to train them in several ways that help promote certain aspects of their attributes. This all leads to being able to pull off a variety of different moves, from counter-attacks to group maneuvers that help make short work of even the most difficult situations. You'll also have what are known as dark portals that litter the battlefield, and these can be used to score extra amounts of damage, but they also spawn new enemies and have the potential to see the fights lasting quite a long time if they're not dealt with right at the beginning. Le Pucelle is an absolute hidden gem that unfortunately never got the recognition it deserved, and is still just as enjoyable to play today as it was all of those years ago. Sugunai Atonement is perhaps one of the most overlooked RPGs on the PS2 that went on to become a sort of cult hit amongst those that appreciated it for what it was trying to do. This was mainly with its unique premise that saw you taking up the part of a soldier whose soul is being separated from his body and has got to redeem himself by possessing and helping others. While this overarching story forms the foundations of the adventure, it's the range of different characters you inhabit that make up the bulk of the story that's told. All of them are sad, and in order to move on to the next, you've got to make them happy, which covers a wide range of scenarios from helping those deal with loss to uncovering the dark secrets of criminals. It ends up being one of the most enjoyable aspects of the game. Now, in terms of gameplay, it's pretty much your typical RPG fare that sees you exploring the world and solving puzzles, and of course getting into combat. It's a turn-based affair and plays out in the usual fashion, with you having a wealth of options when it comes to attacking, from basic hits to magic. But what helps mix it up a bit is the inclusion of being able to summon up to 2 different creatures that fight alongside you and give you an extra edge in each fight. On top of this, there's a bit of added strategy to each encounter, with the ability to defend yourself, and when used at the right moment you can reduce the amount of damage you take or even land a counter attack of your own. To be fair, a lot of the time you'll spend within the game is exploring and interacting with the people who need help rather than just taking on battle after battle, and thankfully these interactions are really well done, so it never feels or becomes mundane. So for anyone who's got a love of the more traditional approach to RPGs, then Sugunai Atonement is definitely worth looking into. Chaos Wars is an SRPG that brings together many characters from a range of different games, like Shadow Hearts, Spectral Forces, and Blazing Souls, and opens up with 3 children who find themselves being transported to the mysterious world of Endia, a floating landmass made up of various islands that serve as the destination for the end of all worlds where many of the game's characters come from. It's not long until you come into contact with several factions who are fighting for the control of ancient artifacts known as keys, which are rumoured to have the ability to get everyone back home to their original worlds. It's a pretty cool premise, but the gameplay differs a bit from the usual tactical setup, and instead of each of the battles taking place on a grid-based battlefield, all of the movement takes place within a circle, with your character in the middle where you're given a set amount of steps to move around. As you would expect, you get the choice of several actions, from basic attacks to the use of items and magic or special abilities that each character brings to the table. As with many RPGs though, there's a huge range of customization when it comes to weapons, accessories and armor that all have an effect on your performance out in the field. But one great inclusion to each fight is the S-gauge mechanic, which allows each team member to power up and perform combination attacks that provide a huge amount of damage. As many will already know though, the game is quite infamous for its incredibly bad voice acting, with many of the characters sounding well below par for what you would expect. It's gone on to become a sort of meme amongst the RPG community, and even though the extreme lack of quality in the voice work does let the game down, it's still a really enjoyable game, and if you're willing to overlook some of its flaws, you'll no doubt have a good time playing through it. Inuyasha: Secret of the Cursed Mask is based on the anime that focuses on a modern day teen who finds themselves being transported to feudal Japan who's mistaken for a demon. You end up joining Inuyasha's group and ultimately work towards finding a way home. That ends up being a pretty heartfelt adventure that spans across a variety of locales, from various villages to the peaceful countryside or the depths of the darkest caves. The world itself is a great highlight and feels very in line with the anime, so any fans will instantly feel at home, and thankfully the gameplay matches it. It follows the blueprint of many other RPGs and sees you exploring the vast world and getting into random encounters with a range of different enemy types, and the turn-based system is pretty well thought out. For anyone familiar with Grandia, it follows the same sort of idea, where each and every one of your actions are tied to a bar, but it's actually a circle in this case, that tracks the turn order. Throughout the course of the game, you'll come into contact with a cast of characters that end up joining the party, which all brings something different to each fight. From attacks to magic and the use of items, you've got plenty to help even the odds, and what builds on the system even more are the special joint attacks that let more than one character attack at a time and provide you with a means to deal some serious amounts of damage. One area where the game excels is the visuals that got the full treatment and was worked on directly by the series artist that helps bring each cutscene to life, with the in-game design staying faithful to the originals as well. A real standout though are the environments and backdrops that have a sort of hand-painted quality to them and blend well with the characters that go a long way in making the game feel authentic. Even though it's not one of the most intricate RPGs that you'll find on the PS2, if you enjoy Inuyasha, you'll likely find a lot here to love. Phantasy Star has long been one of the best franchises when it comes to RPGs, with its roots reaching all the way back to the days of the Master System, and Generations is essentially a remake of the first game with updated visuals and slight changes that make it the best way to experience it. One of the most notable additions was how the story was expanded and the inclusion of a talk feature from the later games that allows all of the characters to banter together, which really adds to the overall narrative in a really positive way. Now it sees you taking up the journey as Alice, whose brother was sadly slain by a tyrannical king's robotic army, and this prompts her to seek revenge and takes her across the galaxy, where you come to recruit a range of colourful characters as you jump from world to world. The gameplay is where Generation truly shines though, and retains the turn-based combat from the original, with each of your party members excelling in different areas. From tanks to healers and all-rounders, there ends up being a lot of strategy involved when it comes to each encounter, and with a steady flow of experience points you grow at a nice pace, and learn new abilities along the way that makes slaughtering your enemies all the more easier. One nice addition is the crystal system, which allows you to equip a whole range that bring along various benefits, such as regenerating a small amount of HP each turn or adding elemental based damage to your attacks. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though, as it does have a tendency to feel a bit low budget, and this is no more apparent than when it comes to the visuals. The overall artwork during cutscenes and battles is pretty well done, with plenty of well drawn characters and effects for each attack, but during the moments of exploring the different worlds they do end up feeling a bit bland. Obviously it's nothing that ruins the game, but it would have been nice to have seen a bit more effort go into the environments. All in all, if you love Phantasy Star, then this is one to add to the list. Well, that does it for another video. Keep an eye out for the next one, as that'll be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Road Rage, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Affinium Mind, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you can find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.